I am pleased that we are ready to act, and we will be able to pass legislation in a few moments that will help deal with this pandemic. Like my colleagues, I've been in teleconferences with different groups in Maryland, and I've seen the pain caused by the coronavirus. In Maryland, we're losing around 30 citizens every day to the coronavirus. Over last week, our nation's lost over 15,000 to the coronavirus. This pandemic is with us in a very serious way, and we need to respond. So I am pleased that this afternoon we will be providing additional resources to our healthcare providers, particularly those that are on the front lines in dealing with the coronavirus, and that we will be passing legislation to establish a national strategy on testing, working with our states to make sure all communities have adequate testing so we can, when we reopen our society, do so in a safe manner. I'm also pleased that we're acting on the small business provisions. The programs that we passed in the CARES Act that provide help to small businesses was very popular and was oversubscribed. But I'm particularly pleased that we're able to pass today provisions that are greatly improved from when I was last on the floor a little over a week ago, when the Majority Leader made a unanimous consent request that would have included only additional money for the Paycheck Protection Program at $250 billion, and would not have dealt with the health care issues or the challenges that I expressed on the floor at that time in regards to the small business provisions. And the reason that we now have a bill one that we can be very proud of is because this has been negotiated with all members of the Senate being involved through a bipartisan process rather than just being brought to the floor by the majority. We saw that happen on the CARES Act originally. The original bill that was brought to the floor by the Majority Leader, he attempted to pass, did not include major help for our state and local governments, did not include major help for our healthcare institutions, did not provide funds for many of our programs that are critically important to our local communities. So we were able to improve that program because we worked together, Democrats and Republicans, and produced a bill that we could be proud of. As I said when I was last on the floor, in regards to the small business provisions, we have a bipartisan process. Senator Rubio and I have been working very closely together to develop the tools for small businesses. And yes, I do acknowledge the work of Senator Collins and Senator Shaheen, because we have come together to try to put together a package that could work. But what I mentioned on the floor when I was last, when the UC was made, there were problems with the original request made by the Majority Leader, and I pointed that out. Underserved communities have not been able to get in the same number as those who have relations with banking institutions, the larger small businesses. Mr. President, I pointed that out to the Secretary of the Treasury and to the Small Business Administrator on April the 7th by a letter that I authored along with Senator Schumer and the Democratic members of the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee. We pointed out, this is 2 days before we had the original UC requests. We believe, and I'm quoting from that letter to the Secretary and the Administrator, we believe that more can be done to reach out to and authorize those lenders, such as community development financial institutions, minority depository institutions, and mission-based nonprofit lenders, which are in the best position to bridge the trust gap between many underserved communities and the traditional financial sector. For example, a survey conducted by the Association of Enterprise Opportunity found that more than half, 51%, of Black respondents indicated they felt unfairly treated by financial institutions compared to only 26% of white respondents. So we knew we had to do something to bridge that gap. So when the request was made 10 days ago, it did not include any help for these minority businesses or the rural areas or women businesses that have been shut out in great numbers to the first requests under the Paycheck Protection Program. So what this bill that we now have on the floor does, it corrects that. It corrects that by providing $60 billion in addition to the $250 billion. So we're now up to $310 billion more going into the Paycheck Protection Program, but $60 billion is dedicated to dealing with minority communities and rural communities and women-owned businesses by having more funds going out to the community banking institutions and minority banking institutions and mission-based nonprofits lenders, so that we can get more of the funds into the hands of those small businesses that are in desperate need. The smaller small businesses. I have numerous examples. I'll just use one, if I might, Mr. President, from a business in Maryland, E.N. Frederick, that writes to us and says that thanks to this program, this employer has 20 employees. This is a small business, 20 employees. And what he says basically is that I was looking to how I could transition my employees to unemployment because I couldn't afford to continue to keep them on payroll. But now, thanks to the Paycheck Protection Program, I'm able to keep my employees on the payroll. Quote, that's the best thing about PPP. And I couldn't agree more. That's what we're trying to do. It's paycheck protection. Keep workers employed so small businesses don't have to go back out when this virus is over and try to find a workforce in order to be competitive. They can keep their workforce in place. And by the way, taking the pressure off of our unemployment compensation system. We were able, through the change that we're able to make, and I really applaud Senator Schumer and Speaker Pelosi for sticking to that principle that all small businesses need to be included. And as a result, this package now includes those allocations that will get to our minority and underserved communities. But there was a second issue I raised on the floor 10 days ago, and that was the economic injury disaster loans, the EIDL loans. It ran out of money before the PPP program ran out of money. It was not part of the unanimous consent request by the majority leader, as well as the grant program that was created under CARES. Now, Mr. President, smaller small businesses use these disaster loans. Why? Because it gives them working capital so they can stay in business. PPP covers payroll, but they need more than payroll. These are longer-term loans with no payments during the first year so that businesses can stay afloat after a disaster. And we qualify the coronavirus as one of those disasters. So this is a critically important program in our state, in our nation. But we added to it by providing a grant program, up to $10,000 in grants, not loans, to small businesses. Well, in my state of Maryland, we had 12,000 small businesses that applied for that grant. We had 26,000 apply for the PPP. So just pointing out how popular this program is. The grant program is $10 billion. The PPP program is $349 billion. It ran out of money before the PPP program, the grant program, and we needed to put more money in that program. The unanimous consent 10 days ago didn't do that. Thanks to the negotiations of Senator Schumer and the Democrats, we were able to get $50 billion put into the EIDL, the Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, which will be able to leverage about $300 billion of additional loans under that program that will help the smaller of the small businesses. And we were able to get $10 billion put into the EIDL grant program so they can open once again applications from small businesses that want to get the cash grant from the Small Business Administration. These loans and grants are made by SBA, not by financial institutions, so all small businesses have access. I did some rough calculations. If my math is correct, in Maryland, the average size of a business that qualified for the EIDL grant was between 4 and 5 employees. These are really the small businesses. That's the group I would hope we want to help. The original UC did not have that. We now have funds in it. this package is much better to reach those small businesses that desperately need help. Now, I brought this to the attention of Secretary Mnuchin shortly after our conversations on the floor last time, and I want to thank Secretary Mnuchin. When I explained to him the EIDL program and I explained to him how these programs work for small businesses, he showed interest, and I'm glad that we were able to negotiate with him the additional $60 billion going into those programs. It's a better package, thanks to the bipartisan process. I do want to mention one additional issue that we need to deal with, and that is accountability. We need to get information on how these programs are working, and I would hope that we would get bipartisan support for that. On April the 17th, I authored a letter with Senator Schumer and Senator Wyden and Senator Shaheen to Secretary Mnuchin and Administrator Carranza, in which we asked for the PPP program, give us the numbers and amount of loans dispersed to small businesses, including a breakout of loans by state, demographics, industry, loan size, number and amount of loans dispersed to businesses under the NICS 72 exception. That's the one for restaurants and the hospitality field, including a breakout of loans by state, demographics, and loan size. Give us the number and amount of loans provided to nonprofits. Nonprofits for the first time are eligible for these 7A loans, and religious institutions, including a breakout of the loans by state, industry, and loan size, and the number of loans dispersed broken out by lending institutions, including so we can find out what the concentration of these loans. And then similar information in regards to the economic injury disaster loan program, the numbers, et cetera. Give us that information, including those who have received the grants. And then lastly, we asked for information about the loan forgiveness program, because there's another program under the CARES Act that allows for a 6-month forgiveness of repayment of existing 7A or 504 loans, and we need information on that. We need this information in order to carry out our responsibility of accountability. We have a responsibility to make sure the money is getting to the right places. I had a communication with Senator Rubio this week in which we both agree that we are concerned that you might be seeing some large chains getting more money than we think we intended under the Act. We intended there be a $10 million cap, but yet we've seen reports where certain businesses were able to find a way to get more than $10 million. We also had self-certification, but there's need. You have to show that you've been damaged by the coronavirus. And we think we should have examined whether there was any false certifications. So the first thing we want to do on the Small Business and Entrepreneurship Committee on a bipartisan basis is do our oversight to make sure that if there's abuse, that we put a spotlight on it and correct it to make sure that the monies go to the small businesses that we intended to receive help. We need now to work on the next stimulus package, and I was glad to hear the President talk about this. Senator Schumer talked about it. Yes, our first priority should be the health and welfare of the American people and dealing with the coronavirus itself, and we're going to need to do more. We clearly need to deal with state and local governments. That's going to be a critical part of the next package. But we also need to look at improvements in the small business package. We know that this 8-week period on repayment, many members have heard from small businesses that they need additional flexibility. After all, how do they predict when they can reopen if government has told them they have to stay closed? We need to give some degree of flexibility in the 8-week period. We have different small businesses that want us to consider their eligibility. And what happens after 8 weeks? If we're still seeing our economy not up to full speed, we need to talk about how we transition after 8 weeks to make sure these small businesses can succeed. The lesson learned on the CARES Act, the lesson learned on this legislation we're taking up this afternoon, is when we work together, when we negotiate together, when we do a bipartisan package, which the American people expect us to do during this national emergency, we get a better product and we can do it quicker. I urge us all, as we move on to the fourth stimulus package, let's start from the beginning in a bipartisan way so that we can get the very best product for the American people and deal with this national crisis. With that, Mr. President,